so much, Eric and Aisha, for joining me today in the panel discussion. I'm pretty sure it's going to be very interesting. The topic is interesting and your backgrounds are really, really interesting, suiting the topic. Before we actually go ahead and start having a discussion, why don't you introduce yourselves?
Thank you, Jas, for having me. I'm Aisha, and I have a software engineering background. I've been in this industry for a number of years. You'll find my verbiage cryptic because I don't want to give or date myself. So it's been a long time. And currently I'm in cybersecurity domain. I have worked for companies like Apple, have worked for Palo Alto Networks, and the cybersecurity domain is interesting. It's very fast and always something exciting to work on. And these days it's all about how to secure against AI. So I'm loving it. I lead an engineering team at Zscaler today, and this team builds the experience platform, which is basically a way for our customers to go and set up policies, do administrative tasks, and look into observability or visibility or insights on what's happening on their enterprise and secure themselves. The most important part of my life, which is my family, I have to mention them, otherwise they will be upset. I have 3 kids. I have a 14 going on 15, getting into high school, and 11 years old going into 12, becoming a middle schooler. So big milestones. And then I have a 7 years old daughter going into 8, into 3rd grade. So I live in the Bay Area with my lovely family, and I love hanging out with my kids, my husband, and we love traveling together.
Thank you. Thanks, Aisha. Eric.
Okay. So Eric Gaston, thanks for having me. Jas, nice to meet you as well, Aisha. So I live in New Jersey. I'm outside of New York City. I was born here. Actually, I ended up all over the world. I lived in Germany. I lived in New Zealand and Australia and all over. And then I still came back to New Jersey. Somehow that happens. Have 2 children, so I'll start with the family. So I have 2 children. My son, as I said, they're both adults now. So I have a son who's graduated from Boston College last year. He's working in New York, and my daughter is currently at William & Mary. She's going to be a rising junior. Career-wise, I've been doing this. I guess I'll just date myself. I've been doing technology for a while. So I started my first big role, I guess, running anything was probably about 2005, 2004. So I've started in banking primarily, ran platform data services at Deutsche Bank. I've ran target state architecture as a CTO at Morgan Stanley. And then I've done and product management. And then I've also been a CTO of a software company, so a large global trade platform called Intra. And that was kind of my time as a practitioner. All of my work as a practitioner is around transformation. Thank you for having me, Jas.
Let's begin. Let's deep dive. But before we actually start having a discussion on AI part, I would like to start with the foundation's visibility. Right. So I would like to read a statement from Microsoft, which was a report named as Digital Defense Report. And that report found that in ransomware cases that reached the ransom stage, over 90% used unmanaged devices, either for the initial access or remote encryption. This statement and this report has really stayed with me because it means the breach often starts where enterprise visibility is 0. So, and my reaction is, before we actually ask that can AI really defend us faster, don't you think we should be asking, can AI even see what it is supposed to defend? Coming to you, Eric, first, from a CIO lens, what's your opinion? I want to understand that how enterprises really operate when they have this level of invisibility.
I mean, yeah, so that is a good question, right? The bottom line is really that, anything to either perform well or to be effective, you have to have the observability or the visibility. If you can't touch it, you can't secure it, you can't manage it. And I think we've been struggling with that for years. And if you look at different industries, advancements make it even harder. So if I take healthcare, medical devices, things that don't have chips, stuff that sits at the edge, the big problem with observability is that most companies were designed sort of from an inside out approach. And if you look at how technology's evolved, technology sort of started in the middle. The problem we're running into now, and the reason why that visibility is becoming more and more difficult to manage, is that our businesses no longer grow at the core. They grow at the edge. And we keep adding devices and adding, so it's bring your own device. And then if you look at, the pandemic, we immediately had to make this pivot and add more, so we added so much weight at the edge. And I think the big problem you have with it is when I talk to CISOs and CIOs, they just go like, look, the table has no edges anymore. And then we started using third-party software. We expanded the number of APIs. You start thinking about this, it just keeps snowballing. So that 70%, it's not so much what's in the 70, it's what's in the 30, or even, and even places where they say, we're 95%. It's like the 5% is the tough part, because you can't look at this and say observability, visibility, it's the core for everything. It is the foundation for every single security program. Step one is always get visibility. So I'll stop there. I know that's a lot, but I'd love to pass it on.
I'll come back to you to know some of the scenarios, but then let me go to Aisha and check. Aisha, do you think from the engineering perspective, right, when AI is getting trained on this incomplete telemetry data, what do you think? It fails loudly or quietly, and what matters more to you as an engineering leader?
Thank you, Jas, for that question. I think we all have heard lines like AI is as good as the data. And we all kind of know that when data is incomplete, and then the SLIs or the metrics that we have defined are not good enough, they don't take into account that completeness, then we have assumptions that are not validated or not trustworthy. You can fully trust those assumptions. So these problems then get exposed more because you have incomplete data. You're telling half the story, and then those assumptions that tell that half the story are incorrect. That's like the accelerator. But let's look at what we are already doing wrong, or what are the challenges, which is observability, having completeness of that data. And you are very right, Eric. Sometimes, and most enterprises didn't focus on that completeness because either that was their blind spot. They were busy either shipping features, and then I have seen it from the side where the enterprise or cybersecurity company that's focusing on securing that. So, what I would say is AI security it's not failing because models are weak or the tech is not there. It's mainly because of that quality of the data. And when I say quality of the data, is how complete is it? Are you capturing all the signals? Are your dashboards only showing you the stuff that you put there with assumptions, or are you looking at signals that you didn't consider, or are you challenging all the assumptions? So success is when we start challenging the assumptions. We look at this, and then we also look at the trustworthiness of the data. Can we trust it? Security is failing silently because it's failing on the things where we weren't paying attention to unmanaged devices, for example, or unauthenticated traffic.
Yeah, Aisha, completely agree to it. And Eric, from your lens, I would like to know that what are some of the steps senior leader, CIOs can take to have more visibility in their organization, right?
Sure. So there's a couple things. And I think part of it actually has to do a lot with what you were talking about, Aisha. The first problem you run into is that it's change management. And when I look at engineering, so I run product development, and when you start to do it, you get in this pattern, right, where instrumentation, for example, all the sort of non-functional requirements start going into your product or not. And then it seems like every time you make a release, you kind of contribute to the problems you already have. So you spend the whole month kind of unwinding things and fixing them. And then you get to the end of the month and then you put something into production. So I'd say first thing is, make sure that through your SDLC and your process and your release, like there has to be good governance. You can't squeeze the balloon and develop for, have a huge development cycle and no testing. Like testing is very important. And if you start to think about the ability of AI to generate unit testing and things like that and regression, it's an incredible advancement. So the first thing I think is really get focused on that pre-production, kind of like the process through SDLC. The other thing is you have to partner with the business. If you're a leader, shadow AI or shadow IT, it's been a problem for years. The big problem you start to run into is, the business has money. They go out and they start to build things sort of behind your back, or when you don't know them, they put them in production, and then you're there with assets. That's where a lot of it comes from. The IT department, we're going to set the guidelines, we're going to provide governance, and we're going to have buy-in from you. But I need business stewardship. The business actually has to understand that they own the data. They own the outcomes. We're here to help deliver that for you. If you don't have that relationship tied together, you're going to end up with a bunch of assets and a bunch of data that has no ownership, and you don't really even know what the business outcome of them are. And that's where you put the most risk, I think, on an organization from visibility.
Yeah. So I think with what you have said, like inventory management, endpoint management, asset management, in all of these areas, we should have tight kind of scrutiny, and whoever is coming in, coming out should be tracked properly to have the 100% visibility.
Absolutely.
Right. And is there any framework or something we can talk about to maintain this? I know this is a very, very broad topic, but on high level, if you think of any framework, open question to both of you.
I just have zero trust, I would hope.
Yeah.
Just saying.
I think I want to add one thing to what Eric was saying. Like, what he's saying is along the lines of making security as first principle when you're building. So from an engineering point of view, from the time that you make a code change and you commit this, there should be security scans running. So your black duck, your check marks, your SAS scans, and like all those scans should be running. And now I think people in engineering domain or leaders should be thinking about how to run AI, scans in like, for example, we've been hearing about, Anthropic and OpenAI launching these new models that are focused on the security domain. So I think those things should be baked in as first step, right? Not later on when it's in production. So that's one thing. And then I think generally from a framework point of view, it's zero trust, and now zero trust with AI, of course. And it's not just now. Whatever we were doing with AI scans before, it just needs to become part of the CI, the continuous integration process when you're building things. So I think one thing with zero trust that I want to say is like, that's the whole point, that you are looking at all the unmanaged endpoints. You're looking at all sorts of traffic, agents, unauthenticated traffic. You're looking at shadow SAS. You're looking at, east-west blind spots. You're paying attention to signals that you might have missed otherwise. And why is that important? Because see, in cybersecurity, you have to have confidence in your approach, and it's expensive if you misplace that by having assumptions about some signals that you ignored them. So yeah, that's kind of, my add-on to what Eric was saying and what you're asking in terms of framework. So security as a principle, and zero trust with AI.
So we have talked about visibility. We have talked about the best practices one can take to make sure that things are visible before actually implementing AI, so that they just do not enhance that blind spot and they work on the realistic data.